Let's talk picking up stitches for Gnutmeg. This is a tutorial from Imagine Landscapes, and it is for the Adventure Gnome pattern. This is a hat made for a gnome, and we're going to be picking up stitches for the inside. And when we do that, so that we don't have to sew the hat down to the body later, it makes it a lot easier if we're sort of knitting them as one. We have a stitch marked that marks the first stitch in the round, and that is a great place to start your pickup. If, like me, you wove in your end and it's a little bit messy here, you might want to not start there. So what I like to do is two things. I'd like to advise that you roll it up, and I advise that you don't pick up and knit. So there's two versions of knitting or picking up stitches. One is where we pick up and knit, and pick up and knit actually means we grab a loop from something, let's say like this, and we knit on with new yarn, which is a little harder and requires a bit of fuss. There's a lot of moving pieces going on, and often I would do this with a crochet hook, for instance, because it's easier to get under, through, and then pick up the yarn and get the yarn back through and under. But to de-stress the whole process, I actually advise that we do this as two steps. We're going to pick up and then we're going to knit. So the great thing about that is if you get off center and you don't have your first stitch in line, or whatever, you can shuffle things around now or even later in the gnome, especially Gnutmeg. Gnutmeg is a very forgiving gnome. So I'm going to move away from this end with the woven in end. So when we pick up stitches, what we don't want to do is if we pick up, say, here, and our hat rolls a lot, it would have to roll a lot, but it's possible that these green blips would come through, or whatever color your color 2 is. So we don't want to pick up what would technically be the very last, very topmost of the C1 color. What we want to do is go down and go right up the first ones before any of that other color comes in. And if you look at the back of, at the reverse stockinette, there's a lot of sort of like rainbow shapes. Or you can also think of them as caps, and then in between there's smiles. Let's see if I can make that a little more obvious. Let's do the color transition. So if you think of this as a cap and this is a smile. Well, today we're just going to pick up in the caps. So we're just going to grab every one of those little rainbow arches all the way around. Obviously we'll need more than one needle or needle tip to do this, depending on whether you are doing magic loop or DPNs. But all I'm asking you to do is go around and pick up each one of those. Then once we've got that all done and everything prepped, then we can add the yarn, and then it's just knitting, and that's so much easier, especially when you're working inside a small circumference thing like a gnome. So I've done that. Now it's time for me to find where I've put my other needles and continue on. Once I've picked up all the stitches, we will I'll just show you what knitting looks like. And I'm also going to give you a tip for not accidentally knitting your gnome inside out. So I've counted and I've picked up 40 stitches, so that's great because we're supposed to have 40 stitches. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to join the yarn. I'm going to find where my stitch marker is, and I am going to simply begin knitting. Now, if you are knitting on DPNs, it is possible, although also with Magic Loop, it is possible to accidentally start knitting somewhere else and to knit inside out. So if, for instance, I were to start knitting here, where I can see the stockinette from the rest of the hat, then I will get stockinette on the gnome body. But if I were to start knitting here, where I can see the reverse stockinette, I would produce reverse stockinette on the outside of the gnome. So if I were to knit here, of course the purl bumps would all go to the back and we would get reverse stockinette. So make sure when you start knitting in the round that you're knitting on stitches that are directly above stockinette, and then you will make stockinette. So that's just a little trick for orienting yourself. Make sure you leave enough of a tail that you can weave it in later and secure things there, and just start knitting. So rather than picking up and knitting and causing yourself some headaches, I hope that this simplified things for you and that you feel like you're getting this nutmeg body off to a good start. It's nice and simple. I'll see you for the next tutorial. Happy gnoming!